Hello, everyone, and welcome to Soul Survivor. My name's Chris, and I'm joined by my wife.
Hi, I'm Kelsey.
And in today's episode, we watched Season 1, Episode 2 of Survivor. But before we get into that, I just wanted to say real quick that yesterday we did hear of Keith Nail's passing. He was a two-time Survivor player. Kelsey hasn't seen either of those seasons, but he was great to watch. Super fun character. He got to play with his son, Wes. Really enjoyed watching his 2 seasons of Survivor, and I'm sure Kelsey is going to enjoy them when we get to those. There have been now 14 Survivor players that have passed away. So we wish the best for Keith's family, and we hope wherever he is, he's having a good time, maybe driving a couple of those tuk-tuks up and down the beach. But there are 2 players in Season 1 that we're watching here that have both passed away as well. BB and Rudy are 2 Survivor players that have also passed away.
Unsurprisingly, 2 of the oldest on the season.
Exactly. They were the oldest players in Season 1 here, so it does make sense that they have also moved on. But in this second episode of Season 1, it was titled The Generational Gap, I do believe. How do you feel about that title for this episode?
Well, when I saw that title, I got excited to watch the episode because a big topic last week was the generational gap in this season and on the show in general. So I knew it was going to be more of the same as that.
Okay, so we have 2 different tribes here. We have the Pagong tribe and the Tagi tribe. So we have an older gentleman on each tribe. So on Pagong, we have Bibi, who is the real estate developer, really hardworking, kind of rubbing people the wrong way. On the Tagi tribe, we have Rudy. Which one of those do you want to take a deep dive into first? The situation around Bibi or the situation around Rudy?
Let's talk about Rudy first.
Okay, because I do believe it really did show more of Rudy at the start of the episode, and then kind of transitioned to being more about Bibi. So let's talk about Rudy and Richard Hatch's relationship. How do you feel about that? Actually, before we even get into their relationship, let's just talk about the fact that Richard Hatch did reveal in this episode that he is a gay man. And we never knew that we were going to do this podcast. Survivor was always a thing I really enjoyed. You didn't really watch it. So I would tell you things, and you didn't really know anything about the game, but I would tell you some of the stuff I watched and some of the stuff that happened in the show. And one of the things that I did tell you was that I've always been impressed with how inclusive Survivor is. And I briefly mentioned to you that the winner of Season 1 was a gay man, and you did notice that when he mentioned that in this episode, and you were like, oh my god, I know who wins this season.
I wasn't actually thinking about that last week. I didn't remember that you had said that. But when he came on the show and said that he was gay, I was like, oh, well, it turns out I do know who wins, because now I remember exactly what you said. And it was easy to remember because you specifically said Season 1.
Exactly. So that was like before we had any idea, any thought of doing this podcast. So I didn't know that that would come back and change kind of your view of the game here. But since we have decided on doing the podcast, I've been much more careful with what I've told you. Like, I've told you some vague things, and you do occasionally like walk in the room when I'm watching Survivor. So there are going to be some moments that like I've already told you about that you're going to remember before they happen, or you may have walked through the room as some of these things were happening. So not everything is going to be brand new to you. But I would like to know, how did watching episode 2, knowing who wins the game, how did that compare to watching episode 1, not knowing who wins the game? Because I know for me, I watched all the way through season 36 in order perfectly. And then when I got to season 36, I was so excited to watch Winners at War that I skipped forward to Winners at War. So season 36, I watched like the first 2 or 3 episodes, and then I just skipped forward to season 40. I was like, there's 36, 37, 38, 39. There's 4 seasons that I don't know who the winner is. I don't know if those 4 are in Winners at War or not. So I'm going to take the risk. I'm going to skip forward. And when I skipped forward, I saw one of the players that I had already seen in season 36, so I knew he won season 36. And then there were two other players that I had never seen before, so I knew they both won before season 40 as well. So when I got to their seasons, I knew going into it who won that season. And I really enjoy watching the show from the perspective of knowing who wins, because you analyze their gameplay a little more deeply, like all the way through. So I do hate that you didn't get the opportunity to watch this first season without it being spoiled for you, but I think it does give you a different perspective throughout watching the whole season, knowing who wins.
It really does, because now I can sort of keep an eye on him, see what he does, and sort of see what wins the game to help me predict in future seasons.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess that's kind of the fun of it. I mean, I'm like you. It is interesting. Like, knowing that he wins, like, but I don't know how he wins. And, like, there's still a lot to discover and find out about the season.
Exactly.
Even with it being spoiled. Like, I think it's going to be fun.
And even the players, even when you know who wins, that doesn't mean that there aren't other players that you respect their gameplay enough that they could have won. So I don't think it really ruins the fun, because you see, like, maybe this is where he gained a little bit of an edge in the eyes of the jury, or maybe this is where he lost a little bit. But, like, this game is almost always super close. And I think part of that is each player plays their own game, so each player plays differently. But each jury member is also a different person, different life experiences, different interactions with each person. So you never know, like, what is the key thing that this jury member is voting on? What's the key thing that this jury member is voting on? So their criteria for crowning a winner could be different. So I find that pretty interesting, like, when you're watching the show and seeing every bit of a winner's gameplay, like, how did that transition to the jury?
Because really, half of it is just whoever is voting for you and, you know, why they're voting.
Mm-hmm. So, back to Rudy and Richard's relationship here, their friendship. What did you think about that? That, to me, I really enjoy Rudy and Richard's friendship. And I mean, this episode is kind of the start of that friendship, but it does build further into the season. But what is your thoughts so far on that?
I guess, I mean, it's not that they have similar personalities, but I would say that they have, like, you know, like, the personalities that would click. So I feel like it's too... how old is Richard? Like,
I don't.
How old was he in 2000 on this game?
I don't know, but I can look it up real
Okay.
quick. So we just looked it up, and at the time of filming Survivor Season 1, Richard Hatch was 39 years old.
Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, there's still a pretty big age gap, but
yeah,
because
Rudy's
not as much
72.
as some of the other people. I think it makes sense to me. Just, like, just how they're wanting to, like, strategize together.
I really appreciated the fact that this was in 2000, so times were different than it is here in 2023. But what I appreciated was that even though Rudy is not used to being around gay men, lesbian women, like he said that in the show, he was never disrespectful to Richard. He did say that he wonders how his buddies are gonna, like, what they're gonna say about it when he gets back home. But he was like, don't worry, I'll deal with them. So it's like, it's not something that he's used to. It's not something he's necessarily comfortable with as a 72-year-old man. But he was never rude or disrespectful or, you know, telling Richard that, oh, it's a sin to be gay or anything like that, which I really appreciated, because 72-year-old men at times can be very closed off and closed-minded and not necessarily open to seeing people for who they are. And so the fact that Rudy was able to just accept Richard for who he was and just say, hey, he's one of the nicest men I've ever met. Like, I don't care that he's gay. Like, that doesn't bother me. I thought that was very interesting.
I was surprised that nobody did have a problem with it that I could see.
What makes you say that?
I didn't see any negative reactions.
No, I was saying what is so surprising about it that there were no negative reactions?
Oh, just because it is the year 2000. Like, and it's just so hard to, like, be supported in 2023 when you're queer.
I think it was interesting that Richard was talking about, like, throughout his life, he generally gets to know somebody, and then after they've, like, gotten to know him, they realize that he's gay. And that has been something that has prevented him from really feeling any sort of discrimination for the fact that he is gay, which is interesting because he's not necessarily the type of person that you look at and you would just be like, okay, he's clearly gay. So maybe that is part of what has helped him to always be received positively with it. Plus, he's very...
Right, that's what he's going for in this game as well.
Exactly.
And I think it really helped out.
Yeah.
Unfortunately. And what I mean by unfortunately, like, what I meant was just that, like, it's unfortunate that he had to do it that way.
Mm-hmm. Instead of
revealing yourself up front and then being okay with that, just, you know, without knowing the rest of you.
Yeah, but I also think it's interesting that he's, you know, confident in himself as a person, so he doesn't feel the need to lead the conversation with, oh, hi, I'm Richard, I'm gay. It's,
right.
No, I'm Richard, and then as you get to know Richard, you learn that he's gay.
Yeah, exactly. I know what you mean. Yeah, I get that. It didn't come up naturally as soon as he got there.
I feel like Richard is very open about talking to people about anything, but especially about him being gay, and we saw them kind of sitting around the fire and just kind of chatting about it. And yeah, that conversation was a little funny because, like, Sean was like,
there was so much ignorance.
That it was so funny. Do you want to kind of elaborate on that, like some of the things that Sean said?
It was funny because it was news to him that gay people get offended when they're...
You're talking about Richard. So Sean, okay, so to clarify here, Sean had called Richard homosexual.
Yes.
And then he was like, but y'all don't like to be called homosexual, right? You like to be called gay.
Yeah.
And then Richard was like, what? We don't like to be called homosexual? Huh? I didn't know that. Like, that was really funny. He was like...
I know. Yeah, I loved that part.
And then they were talking about, like, somebody, I think it was maybe Sue, who said something about a lifestyle. And then Richard was very clear. He was like, there may be a lifestyle associated with being gay or being homosexual, but, like, it's not like a choice. Like, he made that very clear. Because, like, I think he was talking to a group of people, and he probably didn't know exactly, like, what their level of acceptance or knowledge or how many people they may know who may be gay. So, like, for him, I think he approached the conversation the right way. He approached the conversation assuming that none of these people have ever interacted with a gay person ever. That's basically how Richard...
That's what makes sense to do.
Yeah, exactly. So he approached the conversation that way and was just very open and honest and willing to answer questions, and I think he was very well received within the tribe. Everybody was kind of worried about how Rudy would react, but everybody else reacted pretty positively, and then Rudy reacted very positively as well, and like I said, I love kind of watching their friendship. Yeah. Imagine if they had just, like, gotten into a big fight about it, and then that would like if Rudy didn't accept Richard as a homosexual and Richard felt uncomfortable that Rudy didn't accept him, then that would mean basically the next time they go to tribal council, that virtually guarantees that either Rudy or Richard is going home, because, like, there couldn't be that big of a conflict in such a small tribe without rocking the boat.
Exactly.
Which is what we kind of saw in this episode over on the Pagong tribe with BB.
They were really getting into it. BB and Jarvis? Is that his name?
I think it's pronounced Jervis.
Jervis. Okay.
I think so. Yes.
They were yelling at one point.
Yeah,
or at least Jervis was.
Well, there was one point. So it kind of started out, they were all kind of, like, working on the shelter. Mainly BB and Gretchen, but Jenna was also helping out quite a bit. and Greg was helping out quite a bit on the shelter. And then Ramona started getting sick. She wasn't feeling too great. She wasn't able to really keep food down. So she wasn't doing too much, and BB was getting really mad that Ramona wasn't pulling her weight around camp. How did you think that went? Like, how did that make you feel that he was being mad at her for not helping when she was clearly sick?
Yeah, that was just hard to watch. Like, I just wanted to, like, scream at him because he's that person who just, like, takes the hardest job that requires the most work and then gets to say, I'm working the hardest because all of you are doing things that are irrelevant because they're easy. And about, like, being sick, like, we were talking about it while we were watching the show. And, I mean, if you're out there for 40 days, like, you're going to get sick at some point, most likely. And not really be able to do anything.
And like,
I think people have different, like, abilities at different times. And they need to see it as something where they are leaning on each other, rather than every person being at 100% of the time, because that's not how it works.
Yeah, so like BB's reaction seemed really inappropriate, being mad at her for not helping when she was sick. I think Jervis had more of a well-rounded approach to it because they showed Jervis kind of talking to the camera, and he was like, I feel like we're all pulling our weight. He was like, some of us have harder jobs than others. Somebody going out and fishing might not look as important as someone, building the shelter, but they're equally important jobs. And he said, some of us have been sick. And he was like, I don't expect them to work as hard as everyone else. So like, he's like, I don't think there's anyone here that hasn't pulled their weight. And I think that mindset lends to a more cohesive group and a better camp life, because everything we saw in this episode was all about BB feeling that people weren't pulling their weight, and then he was being nasty to those people, and that just caused chaos at camp.
Right. Okay, I have a question. So, was BB the person who said that he wanted their team to go to tribal council so that they could lighten the load?
Yes, that's a good segue. So, what had happened after BB was kind of barking orders at a lot of people in camp, people were getting kind of frustrated with BB. Then they were about to make some rice, so they had some fresh water in a pot, about to make some rice, and BB went and washed his clothes in the pot full of clean water that they were about to use to cook rice. And that kind of set everyone off. So everybody had been biting their tongues for the past 5 days. And then finally, everybody's kind of in a circle around BB while he's sitting there, kind of griping at him. I don't think that was the best move to make the tribe more cohesive. I think it would have been better to, sit down, have a conversation, people, maybe everybody air their grievances, but one person talking at a time. How I really felt that it kind of was in that moment was 3 people standing around BB and kind of barking back at him like he had been doing for the last 5 days. But when it's like 3-on-1 like that, you're not really receptive to like taking in that information. So, and BB doesn't necessarily seem like, even if it was 1-on-1, he still might not be the kind of person that takes in that information. And we've kind of seen that between him and Gretchen. I think BB has some leadership qualities, but he also has some really poor communication skills. And I think Gretchen has some leadership qualities, but she has much better communication skills. So she's kind of like more in the shadows. And she kind of tried to act as the bridge between the tribe and BB. And she kind of tried to talk to him 1-on-1 about like how he talks to people and how he's forcing things on people, trying to get him, to be a bit of a better social player. You could tell that Gretchen kind of wanted to work with BB. She appreciated his work ethic, but he was pushing everyone away, making it really hard on her. So I don't think a 3-on-1 sort of attack on BB, which is kind of what it felt like, was necessarily the right move to get him to understand. But we had seen him have the 1-on-1 conversations and still not understand. So I think he's really just the kind of person that it's my way or the highway.
And I think that he even realized that. I'm not saying that he thought that he was wrong. I think he even said after he got voted off that, I don't know if I was supposed to reveal that, but it's all spoilers.
It's okay. This whole episode is about...
I didn't know like we were going in order.
Yeah, this whole podcast episode is about this episode. Yeah, so yes, at the end of the day, BB does end up being the one voted off. And so you're kind of talking about his exit interview here?
Right. He said that he played a good game. He did it the right way. But I think he realized that even if he thought that his game was right, it wasn't the game that he could play with that team.
That's true. Like,
I think he actually just realized it in the end.
That's a really good point that I hadn't even really thought about in the context of this episode. BB's game on this tribe with these people did not work. And honestly, I think his game on most tribes with most people would not work. But it is possible that you could get a group of people together that would work well with BB, and he could have gone further in the game. That's one of the things that's so interesting about this game is there's so many variables. Each player, each jury member, like everything is always changing. And just because something works in one season doesn't mean it'll work in another season.
Exactly. It's like when you think about all your winners, like you know the winners. Mm-hmm. Like if you think about transplanting one winner from like season 40 to like season 35 and thinking about like how they would do, that's actually really fun to think about.
Well, what's interesting is kind of the opposite way of how you just said it. So you're saying take one of the winners from season 40 and put them in another season and see how they do. What I think is interesting is seeing 40 people who have won the game in 40 different ways. And all of them know that the way they won is tried and true because they've done it. So they, while some of them are more open with their gameplay, they're open to more options when it's, do I do this new move that I don't know if it's going to work, or do I go this tried and true method and go that way? A lot of times you see them fall back to their roots. So they go back to the original game that they played, but that's different from the game that they're playing now because they're playing with 40 winners. So it was really fun for me watching Winners at War, seeing 40 people who won 40 different games in 40 different ways, or 20. There's 20 competitors in Winners at War. It's season 40, but there's only 20 winners. But anyway, seeing 20 winners who won the game in 20 different ways with 20 different sets of circumstances, all trying to win the game again with the same strategy is really interesting because you can see aspects of their old game coming into the new game, and then you really see how these winning games stack on top of each other. And
right, so basically what I was saying, you're basically saying that is a thing because, they come back, the players come back after winning, so we do get to see that. I am excited for that.
I think more of what you were saying, which would be interesting if we had any way of knowing, but we have no way of how we would ever know this. But like, let's say we took the winner of season 39, if we took and put him in season 2, and the winner of season 2 and season 39, would they still win the games? Probably not.
No, because it's a different game every time.
It's a different game every time. There's different people every time. So that's really interesting. So we talked about when somebody proves that something works right, it could be difficult for them to let go of it, with like former winners and like Winners at War. But there are some things that are proven to not work. And one of those things that has consistently been proven to not work in the game of Survivor is throwing a challenge. And throwing a challenge was something that was proposed in this episode.
And that person went home.
And who was the person who proposed throwing the challenge, Kelsey?
It was BB.
Yes, it was.
BB proposed throwing the challenge.
And why did he want to throw this challenge?
Because he wanted to, in his own words, lighten the load.
Yes.
So he wanted to get rid of one of the members of the tribe. And that's exactly what happened.
Yes. So they did all sit down and talk about it as a tribe. And BB was trying to convince the tribe that throwing the challenge was the right call.
Yes. Like,
At
who
the-
else would that have benefited?
Well, it's funny because
I guess
it kind of would have benefited the rest of his tribe, because here's the thing. Everybody else wanted BB to go home. So BB would be like, yeah, let's throw the challenge and lighten the load. And then everybody would just vote him out. So it's like, it's the dumbest thing
it is,
for him.
but they would be exactly where they ended up.
Exactly. Exactly. So they didn't end up deciding to throw this challenge. They did try, they did compete, but they did fall short. This was the eating challenge where they had to eat beetle larvae. And so everybody ended up eating one. And so they did a tiebreaker where each tribe got to choose the weakest member of the other tribe to compete in eating two of these the fastest. Whichever tribe ate the two the fastest won immunity. And the Pagong tribe did lose because Jervis could not get two of them down faster than Stacy on the Toggy tribe. So they did end up going to tribal council without throwing the challenge. But BB did end up going home, and that was without them throwing the challenge. So if BB had refused to eat his bug and effectively thrown the challenge, he still would have gone home anyway, so it was still dumb of him to want to throw the challenge.
I just want to say this. Everything that these people have had to do so far has seemed, rough. But at the end of the day, I think a rat for dinner cooked is a lot better than eating two live beetle larvae.
Well, we haven't seen anybody eat any rats yet, but at the end of the episode, it does show the preview to the next episode, and it does look like they do get themselves some rats in the next episode, so we are going to get to see that and talk about who finally ate a rat, and it sounded like a couple of people were pretty excited about it, like Jenna and Sue.
Yeah, and I couldn't blame them.
Hey, you gotta
Even
eat.
this time around. I couldn't blame them.
Imagine this, though. They're so hungry that they're willing to eat rats, even though they have fruits and canned food and rice and all that. Imagine, like, the newest seasons that are coming out now that literally don't even get a bag of rice. They get nothing. No food. These people are already so hungry that they will eat rats. And as the game goes on, people get less and less food, making them more and more tempted to eat rats.
That's so true.
Okay, so the last thing that I can think of that we didn't really talk about in this episode was the fishing. There was a lot of fishing done, and Sean even made, did he call it a super pole? I think he called it was either super pole or super rod, something like that.
I think it was a super pole.
Super pole, I think that's what it was. But he basically took a piece of bamboo, fashioned it into a fishing pole with some string and a piece of styrofoam as a bobber. But throughout the entire episode, they were fishing. They were like checking fish traps and things like that. And so far, they have not successfully caught a fish.
And why have they not? Why have they not? Would it really be that hard?
I mean, imagine if you've never been
kind of
fishing
shallow.
before. Imagine if you've never been fishing before. And then you get put on an island without basic fishing gear. Like, they don't really have that much fishing equipment. They have a couple traps. I'm surprised they haven't caught anything with the traps. But it's not like they have, like, a bunch of hooks and a nice pole with bait. It's like, they have to come up with their own bait. They either have to use some of their food or they have to catch bait. So, like, it's not particularly easy to go fishing.
Yeah, thank you for educating me on that.
But they did have sunscreen. Yeah, I think you mentioned that in the. I think you may have mentioned that in the last episode because we saw it in the preview. But they did actually give the players sunscreen in this one.
Sunscreen, I think, is fine because that's not really a survival thing. That's more just for their personal like health and safety. Like, I don't think. Well, I guess there are survival aspects of going and gathering mud, clay, putting it on your skin to protect yourself from the sun. If we really wanted to get into all of that.
Yeah, well, also this is a game about, like, how well you withstand the elements. And so, while it's not necessarily fair, if you come in as, like, someone who's a redhead with really pale skin, and then someone else who's got dark hair, dark skin, they come in, they kind of get a bit of an advantage in the game, you know, like, because they don't have to worry about getting sunburnt as badly as maybe somebody with fairer skin. So while that's not necessarily fair, it's not necessarily an even playing field, like, nature, the elements, is supposed to be the equalizer, because like their bodies deal with it differently, so we see how their bodies deal with it differently, but they all have to find a way to cope with it themselves. So in future seasons, I'm pretty sure they don't get sunscreen, because that in a way is kind of an advantage.
I guess it's not a fair game to begin with, because everybody has different just physical, I don't even know.
Yeah, exactly.
Physical attributes to help them get through the game.
It's funny
Body
because
types.
so many of these elements are unfair, but I think by allowing so many unfair elements in different ways, like, it kind of makes it all fair. Because, you know, somebody who might be physically strong might not necessarily be socially strong or strategically strong. And then somebody who's strategic might not be physically strong or socially strong, but they have good strategy. And so,
Right.
it's the combination of there being multiple areas that are so vastly different that it kind of equalizes to almost make it a fair game.
Yes.
Even though it's completely different for everyone.
Everybody is in the same boat, because everybody is coming with advantages and disadvantages to their game,
Exactly.
whether or not they're going to go far in the game.
And so it's hard to measure. I mean, I wouldn't say it's necessarily equal, because like there are certain demographics that struggle way harder than other demographics to win the game, but yeah, I think the complexity of the entire game makes it hard for something that may be considered an advantage to have like a significant difference, if that makes sense.
Yes, I think it. Yeah, I like how you just said that.
Well, I think we've talked about pretty much everything for this episode. We did want to give everyone like a question of the week every single week. So my question for this week, for you listening, would be, is there ever a situation where throwing a challenge is okay?
I'm sure there is. Like, it's kind of like you said earlier. Like, when BB suggested throwing the challenge, like, I feel like everybody else, like, it would have been fine for them to do it. Because I feel like they had to know that they were safe. Like, BB was clearly the one going home, right?
Mm-hmm. But he didn't really think that he was the one going home, or he wouldn't have really said that. I think towards the end of it, he did realize he was going home, and he just kind of accepted it. But, like, I don't think he was wanting to go home when he initially mentioned throwing the challenge. But by the time they had lost the challenge, I do think he was kind of prepared to go home. Like, he was tired of the game. But I don't think that was his intention when he mentioned throwing the challenge, which makes it kind of funny, in my opinion.
So I'll say a situation in which it's okay to throw the challenge is, say, on one tribe, it's kind of unanimous that there's one person they're wanting to get rid of, and they all know they're going to vote for that person. So, okay, we need to go to tribal council, so we're going to throw this challenge, get rid of this person, and then we're good to go forward.
Yep, that's what you would think would happen, but everybody who seems to think that usually ends up being the one going home. So for you guys listening, let us know your answer to that. If you're listening on Spotify, there's a Q&A section down below, or on YouTube, you can leave us a comment and let us know. Do you ever think it's a good thing to throw a challenge, or is that always a bad idea? Thank you, everyone, for listening to Soul Survivor. If you want to email us any questions, comments, favorite moments of the show, you can send that to soulsurvivor1928@gmail.com.
All right, guys. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next week.